Good morning. We are learning Parshat Chukat. We are in the Art Scroll Chumash on page 839. Parshat Chukat has two parts. The first part brings us back to the first of Nisan of the second year, about a year after Jewish people left Egypt. And the second half of Parshat Chukat brings us to the end of the 40 years in the desert, to the 40th year. Just before Parshat Chukat, we had Parshat Korach, where there was a rebellion of Korach and his conspirators against Moshe and Aaron, and that was instigated by the fact that the Jewish people had to stay in the desert for 40 years, and Korach used the moment that the Jews were disappointed and he started the rebellion. So chapter 19, page 839, Hashem spoke to Moshe and to Aaron, saying, "This is the decree of the Torah which Hashem has commanded, saying, speak to the children of Israel, and they shall take to you a completely red cow, which is without blemish, upon which a yoke has not come." So there are three conditions for this strange mitzvah of a red cow. Number one, it has to be completely red, a female cow. Number two, it has to be perfect in its outer body, no blemishes. And number three is that it did not do any work in its lifetime yet, including in it is that it didn't have any children yet. What is the purpose of this cow? We will see soon. "You shall give it to Elazar the Kohen, and he shall take it to the outside of the camp, and someone shall slaughter it in his presence, and Elazar should take some of its blood and sprinkle toward the front of the tent of meeting 7 times, not reaching it, but just toward in that direction. And someone shall burn the cow, its hide, its flesh, and blood. And Kohen shall take cedar wood, hyssop plant, and red thread, and throw them into the burning of the cow," which means the blood is sprinkled. He's standing outside of Beit HaMikdash. He sprinkles the blood toward the Beit HaMikdash, and that's the whole service of the cow. The rest is the procedure to produce the ash. He burns the entire cow together with all its parts, and in addition to it, he throws in 3 things: cedar wood, hyssop plant, and red thread. Then the Kohen shall immerse his clothing and himself in water, tevilah, and he will be contaminated until the evening. The Kohen that burned the cow becomes impure, and the Kohen that slaughtered the cow also becomes impure. The verse 8 says, "The one who burns it shall immerse his clothing and himself in water, and stays contaminated until the evening." We're going to go through the whole procedure, and then we'll go back and summarize it. On page 841, verse 9, "A pure man shall gather the ash of the cow, place it outside the camp in a pure place. For the assembly of Israel, it shall remain as a safekeeping for water of sprinkling." Now we see what we do with these ashes of the red cow. we mix it with water and we sprinkle that water. We'll find out for what. It is for purification, and we'll see what kind of purification. And verse 10, the one who gathered the ash of the cow also needs to immerse his clothing, and he remains contaminated until the evening. It shall be for the children of Israel and for the proselyte, for a convert who dwells among them, as an eternal decree. Now, let's summarize what happens. We take a cow, a female cow. It has to be red, no blemish, and it did not do any work. And there are 7 steps of preparation of this cow. First, we have to take it outside of the temple and outside of Jerusalem. Number 2, we have to slaughter it. Number 3, we sprinkle its blood 7 times toward Beit HaMikdash. Number 4, we burn the whole cow. Number 5, we add into the fire a little bit of cedar wood, a little bit of hyssop plant, and a little bit of red wool thread. Number 6, everyone that was involved in the service of the red cow becomes contaminated, has to immerse himself and his clothing in the mikveh, and he stays contaminated until the evening. And we said there are 3 people: the one that slaughters it, the one that burns it, and the one that collects the ash. And the last step, gather the ash and store it outside of Jerusalem and use it for purification. In fact, it was divided in 3 parts. One was stored for future generations. One was actively used for regular people, and one was used for purification of Kohanim. Now, on page 841, we continue learning. What do we do with these ashes? We already learned that we mix it with water and we sprinkle the water with ashes onto someone who is impure. What kind of impurity are we talking about? Verse 11 on page 841. Whoever touches a corpse of any human becomes contaminated for 7 days. The contamination, the tum'ah of a dead body of a human, is one of the most severe kinds of contamination. He becomes contaminated for 7 days, and it's not enough just to wait 7 days. He also has to immerse, and besides immersion, he also needs to be sprinkled twice. As verse 12 says, he shall purify himself with the ashes of the red cow mixed in water, on the 3rd day and on the 7th day. Then he will become pure. In verse 13, in the middle, it continues, if he shall have if he will not purify himself, he shall have contaminated the tabernacle of Hashem, and he will, if in his state of impurity he enters the temple, he will receive a punishment of karet, of spiritual excision of his soul. So we learn 3 things about tumat met, impurity of the dead body. Number 1 is that it lasts for 7 days. Number 2 is that you have to sprinkle ashes of the red cow mixed with water on this person on the 3rd day and on the 7th day. And number 3 is that a person who is contaminated may not enter the temple. And then on the seventh day, after the final purification, or after final sprinkling, he immerses himself in mikvah, and then the following day, day number 8, he is completely pure. Now we learn a little bit more about how the impurity of the dead body spreads. Verse 14, this is the teaching regarding a man who would die in a tent. If you have a dead body in a house, a tent is an example of anything that has a roof. Whether there are walls or not, it doesn't matter. As long as there is a roof, there is this special rule. Anything that enters the tent and anything that is already in the tent shall be contaminated for 7 days. Here we learn that it's not necessary to touch the dead body, even if you are in the same house or in the same tent, under the same roof, you become impure for 7 days. It's as if it spreads like radio waves, but only if there is a roof. The way it works is that impurity rises. If there is a roof, the roof blocks it, cannot rise anymore, so then it starts spreading, and then it goes down and fills the entire area under the roof. Any open vessel that has no cover fastened to it is contaminated. Here we learn an interesting rule, that if you have an earthenware container that is tightly sealed with a cover, protects anything that's inside. So if you have any utensil in this tent with a dead body, whether it's open or closed, that is not made out of earthenware, it becomes contaminated. If you have a metal safe, sealed, fireproof, anything that's inside becomes contaminated. But if you have a simple earthenware jug with a seal on top, anything that's inside will be protected from this particular contamination. Now in verse 16 we learn about what if you have a dead body in the open air without the roof. On the open field, anyone who touches this one slain by the sword, or one that died, or a human bone, or even a grave, shall be contaminated for 7 days. So we see here that if there is no roof, then you have to touch the dead body. However, we also learn that you can create the roof with your own body, which means if you lean over the dead body, or you lean over a human bone, or you lean over a grave, the contamination rises, and when it reaches you, you become contaminated for 7 days. So we now learn two different methods of becoming contaminated with impurity of the dead body, either by touching the dead body or anything that's connected to the dead body, like the grave, or the sword with which the person was killed. The sword becomes contaminated also, and if anybody touches the sword, he becomes contaminated as well. And the second way to become impure is by being under the same roof, or by leaning over the dead body. Now verse 17 explains the process of purification. They shall take for the contaminated person some of the ashes of the burning of the cow, and put for it spring water in a vessel. A pure man shall take hyssop plant and dip it in water, and sprinkle upon anything that's impure, for example upon the tent. If it's a movable tent, not a house but a movable tent, it becomes impure as well. And he shall sprinkle upon all the vessels, and upon the people who were there, and upon the one who touched the bone, or the slain one, or the one that died by himself, or if he touches the grave. And he shall sprinkle on the contaminated person on the third day, and on the seventh. And then on the seventh day he shall immerse his clothing and immerse himself in a mikvah, and become purified in the evening. So there are 6 steps in the purification from impurity of the dead body. First, put spring water in a vessel. Second, you add ashes onto the spring water in a vessel, and you mix the ashes together with water. Number 3, you take a bundle of hyssop plant, dip it in water, and then you sprinkle it on the impure person on the third day, and then he has to come back and repeat this procedure on the 7th day. Step number 5, after the final sprinkling on the 7th day, the person immerses himself in the mikveh and his clothing. And step number 6, he has to wait until the evening, and then in the evening he becomes purified. Page 843. This shall be for them an eternal decree. Anyone who sprinkles the water of sprinkling for a wrong reason, he sprinkles it on a person that doesn't need it, or he sprinkles it on an animal, he becomes impure for 1 day, and he shall immerse his clothing and himself in a mikvah. Or someone who carries the water in which ashes of the red cow were mixed, and he carries it not for the purpose of sprinkling, but by mistake he just carries it, he becomes impure also. However, a person that sprinkles it on the right person, he remains pure. A person who carries it for the purpose of sprinkling, he remains pure. Now in chapter 20 we jump 38 years, and we're now at the beginning of the 40th year of the Jewish people traveling in the desert. The children of Israel, the whole assembly, arrived at the wilderness of Tzin in the first month of the 40th year, the final year. And the people settled in Kadesh. Miriam died there, and she was buried there. This was on the 10th of Nisan. That is when Miriam passed away. And verse 2 tells us what happened immediately after Miriam died. There was no water for the assembly. From here we learn that the water that they had from the rock in the desert was in the merit of Miriam, Moshe's sister. And people gathered against Moshe and Aaron. They were thirsty. The people quarreled with Moshe and spoke up, saying, and again people complain, if only we had perished as our brethren perished before Hashem. Why have you brought the congregation of Hashem to this wilderness to die there, we and our animals? And why did you bring us up from Egypt to bring us to this evil place? No, not a place of seed or fig or grape or pomegranate, and there is no water to drink. They have a valid concern. However, the way they're expressing it is improper. Instead of asking politely, Moshe, we know you can do it, please speak to Hashem, we are thirsty, please help us, they go into complaining mode. Moshe and Aaron went from their presence and to the entrance of the tent of meeting and fell on their faces in prayer. And the glory of Hashem appeared to them. Hashem spoke to Moshe, saying, "Take the staff and gather together the assembly, you and Aharon your brother, and speak to the rock before their eyes, that it shall give its waters. You shall bring forth for them water from the rock, and give drink to the assembly and to their animals." This is the second time when Moshe is told to bring water from the rock. The first time was at the beginning of their travels, and then Moshe struck the rock and water came out, and that water lasted for 39 years. And now Hashem tells him, surprisingly, speak to the rock. Now you're on a higher level, you don't need to use force anymore. Speak to the rock that it shall give water. However, here Hashem tricked Moshe, you could say. He told him, take your staff. Why does Moshe need the staff if he is speaking to the rock? So right away, Moshe assumed that in case speaking doesn't help, I have a stick to strike the rock. And he assumed that that's what Hashem meant. On page 845, Moshe took the staff from before Hashem. Now, what is this staff from before Hashem? Some commentators say that this was the staff of Aharon, which he placed in the Kodesh HaKodashim, in the Holy of Holies, and the next morning this staff blossomed, turned into a living tree with branches, with leaves, with flowers, with fruit. And they left that staff tree in the Kodesh HaKodashim. That is why it's called from before Hashem. He went into the Holy of Holies and took this branched out staff as God had commanded him. Moshe and Aharon gathered the congregation before the rock, and he said to them, Listen now, all rebels, shall we bring forth water for you from this rock? Then Moshe raised his arm and struck the rock with his staff twice. He hits it, and he hits it twice. And abundant water came forth, and the assembly and their animals drank. So far we don't see anything wrong. Hashem told Moshe, take the staff, speak to the rock, but you have a staff in case the rock doesn't listen, you can hit it. And that's what Moshe did, and the water came, it worked. However, verse 12 surprises us. Hashem said to Moshe, to Aaron, because you did not believe in me to sanctify me in the eyes of the children of Israel, therefore you will not bring this congregation to the land that I have given you. Moshe, you lost it. Aharon, that's it. They are the waters of strife, where the children of Israel contended, fought with Hashem, and Hashem, was sanctified through them. For such seemingly insignificant mistake, Hashem puts a very heavy blame upon Moshe, decrees death penalty upon him and his brother Aharon. So what did they do wrong? And the commentators give a few answers. One of the answers is that he was supposed to speak to the rock, and he didn't. Instead, he hit the rock. And what's the problem with that? Hashem wanted to teach the Jewish people an important lesson. that everything in the universe listens to Hashem, to Hashem's words. And the example is Moshe speaks to an inanimate object, to a rock, in the name of God, and the rock changes its nature and gives forth abundant living water. And the Jewish people were supposed to take that to heart and say, we're going to stop being stubborn. We're not going to wait until Hashem hits us over the head. We're going to listen from the first time. But because Moshe hit the rock, now the Jewish people remained stubborn, and unfortunately we still have this character trait towards Hashem. We hear the truth, we hear of our obligations, and we are not moved until something hits us. Either a calamity or a sickness, chas v'shalom, or the deadline is approaching and we're about to fail the test, only then we wake up and start doing. But we're not moving until we're forced to. And that was a big problem. Moshe could have accomplished so much by speaking to the rock, and he didn't. Some commentators say because he attributed the miracle to himself, because he said, shall we bring forth water for you from this rock? And he included Aharon. And because he didn't mention Hashem, do you want Hashem to give you water from the rock? Instead he said, me and Aaron are going to bring water from the rock. For that he was punished. And some commentators say because he called the Jewish people rebels. We have a rule that whatever you expect people to be, that's what they're going to be. And if you call people names, they will become those names. You put a title or a label on a person, that's what he's going to be forced to be until someone removes that label and puts a different label on him. So by putting a label on them, you rebels, Moshe is making it very hard for the Jewish people to be anything better than rebels. That's why the custom is to call people tzaddikim. You don't know someone's name, you say tzaddik, a righteous person. Instead of saying, hey you, we say tzaddik. Why? Because even if we don't know who the person is, we see him for the first time, we don't know his name, we want to draw his attention, we're already giving him a blessing, we're already putting a label on him that he is a good person. And Rambam says that the reason Moshe was punished so severely is because he became angry. One of the reason we know he became angry is because he called the Jewish people rebels. Who calls people names? A person who is not in control of himself. And by calling the Jewish people rebels, he showed that he is angry. So what's such a big problem? Forfeiting your life, losing ability to lead the Jewish people, losing ability to enter the land of Israel, dying just because you become angry once. And the truth of the matter is, becoming angry is a very severe transgression. It is unhealthy physically, and it contaminates a person's soul, because by becoming angry, a person is showing that he doesn't believe in Hashem. He is showing that things are not going his way, things are not going the way they should be going, and he can't do anything about it, and he gets angry. He shouldn't get angry, because even though he can't do anything about it, but God is in the world, and Hashem will take care of it. That's number one thing when you want to become angry, say to yourself, Hashem is in charge. He will take care of it. He'll get me out of it. Either this is God's will that it's supposed to be like this, and if it's not supposed to be